I have women who would say, well, Zemmie, what about the woman who is so poor? What about the woman who already has 4 children and she's going to have another child and she is dying because she has sepsis and she knows she's going to die? There's my story. There is my story.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is the show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm welcoming Zemmie Fleck. She is the executive director of Georgia Right to Life in Atlanta, advocating for all life from conception to natural death. She herself has a unique adoption story that she shares so beautifully with us. You'll hear Zemmie's personal story of adoption along with her 4 siblings at just 5 months old. In this episode, you'll also have the chance to expand your perspective as we discuss both sides of the abortion issue. Ultimately, you'll hear why Zemmie believes that any human being can thrive and that they just need to be given a chance. Overall, I have to say this is a pro-life conversation, and in fact, both of us are pro-life. But I don't want that to turn you away from this conversation. There's so much more to this episode than a dry discussion about abortion and right-to-life issues. Zemmie's own adoption story is one of true faith and trust by her parents, and is so inspiring in itself. And the grace and love Zemmie grew up surrounded by certainly comes through in this episode as we challenge both sides of the abortion issue. Whatever your views may be, I hope you'll listen in to hear Zemmie's story and challenge your perspective on this issue. In fact, that's part of what this podcast is all about, challenging our perspectives through story. And if you or someone you know has a related story or even differing views, listen in for the call at the end of this episode to submit your own story and have a chance to discuss your perspective on the show too. We are here to listen, understand, and challenge our perspectives on all issues we face as humanity. And that's what I hope this space allows us to do. Zemmie, welcome to the Love Light Stories podcast. I am so excited for people to hear from you today. It is just lovely to be able to reconnect with you and help you share your story.
Yes, and thank you so much, Stephanie, for having me today and for highlighting this adoption story. Of course, to me, it's a very special story, and lots of people that I've told it to over the years, they definitely have gravitated towards it and said, wow, it's such a unique story. So
it really is, and I'm just so excited for everyone to be able to hear that. And why don't we just start right there? Let's dive into your story. Bring us back to those moments when you were a little baby and were adopted by your parents.
Certainly. So my story begins in November of 1964 when I was born. And even my birth is actually amazing. And I'm very grateful that the Lord spared my life, because one of the things about my birth mother is that she actually had sepsis. She had gotten very sick. And in March of 1965, when I was 5 months old, my mother passed away from lockjaw. And lots of people don't know about lockjaw. It's a form of tetanus, but the tetanus has gotten so severe that the person is left like just stiff as a board. And that's something that's very unique even for 1965, because there were ways of resolving tetanus and of treating it. But that really tells you how poor and destitute my family was, and that my mother did not seek medical attention. So the Lord took her life at that point, and I was 5 months old, and I had four older siblings. My oldest sibling was 14 at the time. So we were left with a father who was an alcoholic. From stories that I've heard, he was very abusive. And so the children were basically left on their own for a short period of time. And then that's when my adoptive parents, who for the listeners of your podcast, I will refer to them throughout this story as my mother and my father, or my mom and my dad, because those are the people that I grew up knowing as my parents. And so they entered that picture about, I believe it was 2 days after my mother's death. And my father, who knew my older siblings, he knew my two older siblings at the time, because periodically they would go to the same church that my mom and dad were at. And my father worked with the youth at the church. My mother served as the church secretary at the time. And so when he found out that the Miller children, their mother had died, he called up his wife, who was at the church office, and said, "You're going to have to tell them that you're not going to be back to work tomorrow, because I'm going to pick up the Miller children and bring them to live with us." Now, let's back up just a minute to July the 2nd of 1964. About 5 months before I was born, that is when my mother and father actually got married. So they had been married for less than a year. And here are 5 children.
Yeah.
Not their own, not related to them. 5 children from the ages of 5 months to then 14 years old, without basically a home. And they brought us to live with them. And they lived 1 block over from Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia, where I've grown up all my life, actually, in Decatur, Georgia. But they lived 1 block over from Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta, and they had a 1-bedroom apartment. So the arrangement was that my 2 brothers slept on the screened-in porch in bunk beds, and my 2 sisters slept on the divided living room sofa, and I slept in a baby crib in the hallway.
Yes, and the fact that this essentially took place overnight. I think you said 2 days after your birth mother died, your dad called up your mom and said, this is what we're doing. And I mean, that says so much about your parents. Number one, that your mom was like, okay, like, just, all right, you're saying we're doing this, let's do that. And they weren't necessarily prepared in a way that a lot of people would say they would need to be prepared as far as the living situations, yet they did it. Tell us about your parents. Tell us more about that, because I think that really does say a lot, but give us insight.
Well, I will say that the example that was lived out by my parents time and time again while I grew up, and as I got older, and as I saw them approaching their own physical deaths. It was one of just an incredible trust in the Lord Jesus and an incredible trust that he would make a way no matter what the circumstances. And they lived that out for all of us. They taught me how to trust him for everything. And it hasn't been until I've had my own children and grandchildren and walked some of this path through later life that I have realized just how much faith they actually exhibited in so many things that they did. And I do remember a story that my mother would share with me that really touched my heart. This kind of brought to me the realness of what it meant for her to become a mother of 5 children. I mean, I can't even myself imagine it, but to become the mother of a 5-month-old child instantly, not knowing really what the child needs, and but those instincts kicking in. But her story that she told me was that when I first came to live with them, she was so concerned that I would cry and she wouldn't hear me in the night. She wouldn't wake up. I would just, something would be wrong and she wouldn't know that it was wrong. And she said, so what I did was I prayed to the Lord and asked him to give me mother's ears. And that story has just touched my life immensely, that the deepness of the care, that she wanted so much to take care of us and to just be a wonderful mother, which she absolutely was. But that's just one example of stories that she's told, but just over and over, the trust that they had in the Lord Jesus in every circumstance. And that was not our adoption was not the only story that happened with.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Just incredible. I'm still trying to place myself in the shoes of your parents, which I think is nearly impossible. I mean, to be that devoted to the Lord and what he's calling you to do, and just that complete trust and faith. It's huge. It's huge. It's really indescribable. You mentioned to me, and this was surprising, I thought, that you didn't know you were adopted because you were so young. And I don't remember when were you told that you were adopted, and bring us back to that moment.
That moment is very alive and vibrant in my mind even now today. I remember exactly the time when my father told me about our adoption, and that was when I was 13 years old. And I don't know why he chose to wait until that time to talk to me about it, unless it was because, I was getting older and probably there were things in the house. I remember books that had my siblings' names in them, but they had Miller, they didn't have Farr, and, things like that. But I really didn't, it just never really affected me to the point where I really asked the questions. But I remember the day at 13 years old when he told me about our adoption and the impact that it had on me. But I have to say that I had no clue before that time, because they treated us all so much the same, because the rest of the story is that they actually had 2 children biologically their own following my birth in 1964, and then I had a sister that was born in 68 and a brother that was born in 73. So, we were all such a family unit, and I never experienced a difference in how they treated me and how they treated their own children. So that to me speaks a lot to how they just knew we're taking people into our family, and we are a family.
Yeah, and to be 13 years old and finally learn that, it does mean like that they had to have treated you so well and so similar to all of the rest of the siblings and the bio siblings as well. And I can imagine, like, what were some of the thoughts that went through your mind when you first learned that this wasn't your biological parents?
I think it wasn't so much that I thought about the fact that I biologically didn't belong to them. I think really what impacted me the most was, here are people who really didn't even know us, and they certainly didn't know me. I don't even know if they had seen me before that 5 months, but they did not know us well, and yet they were willing to just take us in and to love us and to care for us. Because honestly, in speaking with my older sister regarding some of the circumstances, when my mother died, the family members did not want to take all of the children. They wanted to divide us up. And they only wanted the older children. They didn't want the younger ones. And so that to me is a feeling of very great sadness, even now,
Yeah.
because I think, what would make you not want to help your family members? But that's just the way the Lord had it, because I often tell people, I don't know where I would be if my mom and dad had not adopted us. I don't know where I would be. And I certainly wouldn't have the experiences of such a wonderful childhood that I have, and of having my younger siblings as well, because they're my siblings. It does not matter whether it's blood or otherwise, they are my siblings as
Yeah.
well.
That's so precious. So your older siblings, I'm assuming, did know they were adopted because they were old enough to go through that and understand what was happening. But they apparently hadn't said anything to you either, which I think is interesting. But based on what they have told you, what have they said to you about, like, or have they said to you about what life was like at home early on when you were still too little to remember?
My older sister, who I've spoken with probably the most about our pre-adoptive days, and to some degree my older brother, but my older sister, she remembers so many times being very hungry, not having anything to eat, not having things that other young people had at her age. But the hunger is what she really was impressed by the most, was just the feeling of being hungry. And she shared many stories about, there's a there's a story that I'll share here that pertains to butter soup. And the butter soup was melted butter in a bowl because there was nothing else to eat. And she remembers, she has related to me stories of her and my older brother and my parents, my biological parents, actually hitchhiking. And, it was a different day and time, but even so, I think parents taking their children to hitchhike, this doesn't really strike me as being a very good or smart thing. And just, different scenarios, but particularly them being very poor, very destitute, very hungry.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's a sad picture because I'm sure your biological mother probably wanted to provide a better life, but just couldn't. I don't know that, but it's sad. But thankfully, your parents adopted you and your siblings, so there's a beautiful story there after as well. What was it first, based on what you were told, when your parents first brought all of you home? What was it like? And help us kind of get an understanding, I guess, of their true faith. I guess you have shared, some about their faith and the circumstances when they first brought you home. But is there anything else that you have been told about by your older siblings of what it was first like when they came home to your mother and father?
Well, I'll share this, and this will give you kind of an idea of their approach to things, that being my older siblings. My mother did tell me that when they had brought us home to live with them, and maybe it was about 2 weeks after we had all been with them, and she said that my oldest brother and sister came and talked to her and my dad and said, "We would really like to call you mom and dad."
Oh,
So
wow.
that, that to me also indicates that there was this feeling of acceptance. There was this feeling of love. There was
Yeah.
a feeling of genuine kindness, that here are people who care for us and that we trust them. And so we'll call them mom and dad. And it wasn't until we had to actually live with my parents for 4 years before the adoption went through. Because backing up to the day that I left my old house and moved into my new house, my dad just came and picked us up in a car.
Mm-hmm.
And he told my older siblings, from what I've heard in the stories, that basically take whatever you're taking from the apartment right now because you're not coming back here to live. And so I'm assuming they gathered up what little things they had and what they wanted to take. And then we, as far as I know, no one ever even went back there. There was all the ties were broken.
Wow. Yeah, it was an overnight thing for both your parents and you as the children. Wow. Okay, so we've talked a lot about your parents, but I would love to highlight one more thing that you mentioned to me about bringing home a lady in need, and you remember that. Can you just share that story with us?
In between my 7th and 8th grade year of school, my dad and mom came home one evening, and they sat down with us as a family, the siblings that were still at home, and they said, "We want to let you know that we are bringing home someone to live with us." And they explained that this was a lady who they knew through some church friends. She was in a nursing home in Atlanta. She had multiple sclerosis, and she was given about 6 months to live. At the time when she came to live with us, she could move her head and she could still lift her right arm to feed herself. But she had paralysis basically from the waist down and much on her left side at the time. So we so lovingly called her Aunt Gwen. And so Aunt Gwen, as I said, she was given about 6 months to live. Well, it ended up that she lived with my parents for 15 years.
Wow. 15 years.
So when people say that someone has a particular lifespan left, I have to say, well, let's leave that to the Lord, because I'm not so sure that you know exactly that that's the limit of time they have left. But what I gained from that today in the work that I do, which we'll get into, I'm sure, but what I gained from that is that when you have people who have an infirmity or they have some type of physical issue, and you put them in an environment with a loving family that cares about them and brings so much into their life, which, imagine coming into a home where you were all by yourself and now you're coming into this home and there's about 6 or 7 people surrounding you every day. and some of them being young children. So, I'm sure that her life totally changed by being in that environment. But the way that people can thrive, it doesn't even have to be a whole family. It can be one person or two people, but to have that level of care and that level of connection with people, I believe makes all the difference in the world, even when somebody is suffering from something like multiple sclerosis. And it ended up that Aunt Gwen actually ended up being paralyzed completely, even her vocal cords. So, and she did have cancer, which they had to amputate one of her legs. But I mean, she lived for 15 years. And I have so many wonderful memories of taking care of her and of talking to her, and and one thing about her, she loved the Lord Jesus so much, and she had this bulletin board that was hung on the wall across from her hospital bed, and she had pictures. The bulletin board was probably about 5.5 feet wide by 3.5 feet tall. And it was completely covered, like layered with pictures of people that she knew. And she told me, she said, I just sit here and I look at their faces and I pray for each one of them. She said, that's what I do with my time. So there is somebody who really understood what it meant to have purpose in life. And this is my purpose. I'm going to pray for these people.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. And she took what she could have, because like you said, she had multiple sclerosis and couldn't move well and even speak, like you said, affecting her vocal cords. So she found such great purpose in praying for people. And then I feel like your family reciprocated that so well. Like she was giving and serving in her own way. And then you were able to serve and support her. And then, of course, that added to your family so much as well. And it's just so incredible, too, of your parents, again, to just take someone in not knowing and it turning out to be 15 beautiful years together. It really is a testimony of how someone can thrive when they're surrounded by love and support of a family. It's just amazing. And so let's get into your work. You are the executive director of Georgia Right to Life, and it's about life, the right to life, right? Tell us about what you stand for at Georgia Right to Life and what you believe in.
Absolutely. So Georgia Right to Life was founded in 1971. And today we operate Georgia Right to Life as a Christian organization. And here at Georgia Right to Life, our mission and goal is to protect all innocent human life from fertilization to natural death without compromise and with no exception. And the reason that we believe that there should not be a compromise on the right to life is because we believe, as the Bible indicates, that we are created in God's image. And as Jeremiah 1:5 is a very familiar passage to many people, but when you think about before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So that means that in God's mind, we already exist even before we are being conceived in our mother's womb. And so to me, that means that that his creation and his creatures are so important and so loved by him.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why we believe as we do at Georgia Right to Life is just based on God's word and our understanding of the sanctity of human life.
Right. And I'm sure, like you said, your experiences of being adopted yourself and giving that right to life, like you said, you probably wouldn't have survived because of the situation that you were in. And also just that experience of welcoming Aunt Gwen into your home and seeing how she thrived because of that love. And so am I overstepping and saying that those experiences have led you to Georgia Right to Life, or what really called you to work there and become the executive director?
Well, prior to Georgia Right to Life, I worked as a church administrator for just 17 years at a church. And I knew that my time there was coming to an end just because of different circumstances. And I asked the Lord to guide me into work that was a ministry. I did not want just a 9 to 5 job. And I say just a 9 to 5 job, and I don't mean that in any way to diminish anybody's purpose and calling in life, because there are people who work 9 to 5 jobs. But I wanted something that would have an impact on people. And I have always, I think always in my heart, wanted to help people. I have such a burden to help people. And you see people in so many different circumstances, and yes, we can't help all of them, but we can help those. All it takes is us just reaching out or just speaking to them, and many times people in situations will open up and talk. But I had just asked the Lord for ministry, and so he saw fit to put me into a ministry. It was not nearly what I anticipated, because this work is something that is very unique. I think it takes unique people to be engaged in the right to life in any respect, and whatever level that is. Whether it be volunteers, whether it be staff, whether it be leadership. This is something that is very special that God calls people into.
Yes. Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that he called you into that. And it takes, like you said, special people and special circumstances. And I would say even more so today. In recent years, we've had uprising around pro-life and abortion specifically, which is one aspect of the full spectrum of life, right? And so I would love to today to try to better understand the pro-life perspective while also digging into some of the other side of the story, some common debates and discussions, and just understand from your perspective personally, but also from Georgia Right to Life's perspective, what that looks like in some of the contexts and some of the issues that we've been hearing being brought up around this topic. And I'm sure won't cover all of it, but we can dig into a little bit of that. So I guess the first part maybe is to say, you've touched on this a little bit, but you've mentioned about like what you believe at Georgia Right to Life. But is there anything more you want to first say about why you are pro-life?
I personally am pro-life because of what the scripture teaches me about life. And again, that God is the creator of life, and he has the ability to create that life and to take that life. And I just truly believe, again, that as the creator who envisions us before we're even conceived, he knew us. He knew us. He loved us. And we are his creation. And that does not stop at any point in our life, because as the scripture also points out, we are his workmanship. And that word workmanship actually means poem in Greek. And so we are his workmanship. He is writing a poem through what is happening in our lives. And I think, to me, that's just such a beautiful picture of just how much he cares for me. And I truly believe that every person has that right to understand that that's what life is, and that God gives us life, and we are to protect it in every way that we can.
Yes.
As individuals, because everybody's path, here's the thing, everybody's path is unique. None of us live the same exact life. And it's so wonderful, because as unique as our fingerprints are to each one of us, That's how unique our paths are. And we're all at different points in our path.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And I have to say, too, that I myself believe that as well. And I believe in God and that He has created life and He has the right to take life. And I believe only He has that right. But what about people who don't place their belief in God and just don't have that in their hearts? And that does not mean that they're bad people, not in any way. But for those who maybe don't have that rootedness in that belief, what else can they look to? Like, what other evidence or belief can they stand on beyond God's word in a pro-life capacity?
Well, certainly. So I just want to say this because I am a Christian, and my first response is that I pray that if any of those people are listening to your podcast today, that the Lord would reveal Himself to them, that someone would come into their lives who has that wonderful, liberating grace that God gives us, no matter what kind of background we have, no matter what is in our past. We serve a God that loves to save people. That's what Jesus came to this earth to do, was to seek and to save those who are lost. So that's the first response I have. But further than that, as far as the life issue goes, in our time of history, there is so much evidence scientifically that is out there that, we have 4D ultrasounds that are incredible. You see this child in the womb and you can see this is life. We can see the face, the facial features, and you've seen these, and I'm sure most people have. You've seen these postcards that have the face of the child in the womb and the face of the child after it's born, and this is still me.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that there's just so much evidence of that life being formed in the womb that it's very, very difficult to understand how that could be denied. However, I also say this, that a lot of times, first of all, what is happening in our culture is that women are being told a lot of lies about abortion. And that is, well, it's just a one-time thing that you're going to get past. You're not going to have any detrimental effects from this. It's not going, it's just going to be a procedure and then you're done and then it's all over with. And another fascinating thing to me about the time that we live in is because Roe v. Wade was in effect for so long, 50 years, it was in effect. And we are now living in a time when women who had abortions are now testifying to the fact of what effects it did have on their life and how damaging it was to their life, either physical or mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever those effects were. And not just women, but we're hearing from men too, because the men oftentimes just kind of get pushed off into the background. Nobody really thinks about them as part of this process, but they're a huge part. I mean, there's 3 people that are affected by abortion one way or another. That's the man, the woman, and the child. So no matter what those relationships are. So, that's something that we have to really take into consideration.
Right. You're also just advocating on behalf of human life, even just beyond the womb, but just the men and women who go through this, because like you said, of course it's our woman body that goes through the changes and grows the baby and all of those things. But men are just as much of a part of creating and making that baby and ultimately fathering that child if they do have the baby. And so I like that you mentioned that. And I asked that question of, what do you say for those who don't place their belief in God? Because I want to include them in this discussion, because we are approaching this from a faith perspective, but I don't want anyone to feel excluded in that. And like, this is not a conversation that they're welcome to. And so thank you for sharing those examples. Do you have any other like specific examples that you are able to share about the types of things that people have gone through? Because like you're saying, you're trying to advocate on behalf of the women and the men, and in those stories that are coming back of that remorse later on, what were some of the after effects, or what are some of the after effects that they're going through?
So many women and men are now testifying to how this broke them emotionally. And we have statistics which are evidence of the fact that there's so much either attempted suicide or suicide that has come about as a result of abortion. And we see that not just with abortion, we see it with all types of assault on life and different aspects that we're dealing with in our society today. But when we're talking about abortion itself, there's just this, I believe, a huge burden on women, particularly, that, I've had them say to me, Zemmie, my child would be 40 years old now. I think, what would they be doing? We had one lady particularly that I can give an example of. At Georgia Right to Life, we have a march and rally every January across the street from the state capitol in Atlanta. And it was 2021, so it was the 50th anniversary of Georgia Right to Life that year, and we had a banner that was at that march and rally. It was up on the stage. This was the first time that this lady had ever joined us for this event. And later she testified to me. She said, I saw that banner, and she said, I realized that it was 1971 and that my child would have been 50 years old that year. So there is this lie that's being told in our society that abortion is nothing really. It's a treatment, it's a procedure. And so many women are just caught up in that lie. And so many of them regret it. And we've had speakers with Georgia Right to Life who have talked about the regret that they have after abortion. And that's why I'm very, very thankful for post-abortive counseling. And we see many organizations in Georgia that have counselors that deal with this matter, because I'm sure that they can certainly testify much more than I can to the fact that these people that have gone through abortion, they're suffering.
Yeah.
They're suffering silently, most of them, because you know what? Here's another aspect of it. A lot of them have never told one soul that they had an abortion. They have never mentioned it to anyone.
Yeah.
So they are suffering in silence.
Yes. I can also see too, when you say like they're being told a lie, and what my mind goes to is just my own personal experiences of healthcare. Luckily, we are pretty fortunate in the United States to have pretty good healthcare, but I think the last couple of years especially, we've started to see that there are flaws in our system. Becoming a mother myself and having this pregnancy currently, I've realized too, like there is a lot as a mother and a parent you have to advocate on behalf of your own health and that of your babies, because there are so many different perspectives in the medical field, and this life spectrum we're talking about is so controversial, and there are so many viewpoints on it that you really have to like be rooted in what you believe. And I can imagine when you're going through a tumultuous moment in your life where you are considering abortion for whatever reason, and it could be really significant reasons that in your mind you can rationalize and make sense of perhaps going through with an abortion. And so when you're vulnerable in that place And we'll get into some of those rationalizations and things that really are like, it does take a moment to pause and reflect on. But when you're in that vulnerable place, I can see how having the advice from a medical professional, or what you consider to be, and if they're pushing for an abortion or they're offering it as no big deal and it's just one and done, where you could be persuaded. And yeah, it's sad because for some people, they may go through it and never think about it again. We do not know, and it may not affect them, but there are people, as you're saying, that are affected. And it's almost like having this fire in you to want to, like I said, advocate for these people, because they may not understand the magnitude of the decision that they're making in that moment.
Well, and I think that you're very correct when you talk about the medical field, and there is this philosophy, I'll call it. There's this ideal that we have all of these tests and we can do all of these tests. And if a woman is at a certain age in her life, we have to perform these tests and we have to give her all this information in order to let her know all the risk that might be involved with her pregnancy. And I don't know if some of that really stems from the issue of lawsuits. I really don't know where it exactly stems from, that our medical profession really sometimes pushes towards the abortion for women, particularly when they're older women. And when I'm talking older women, I'm talking about like even 35 years old.
Yeah.
But I have my own personal perspective and my own personal experience of something that happened in my family. My oldest son and his wife were expecting their son in 2016, and he was 37 weeks in utero, and his mom was having blood pressure issues, and he was in distress. And so they did go to the hospital, and the doctor said, well, we're going to need to perform a C-section. And then they came to my son, and I remember so many conversations that I had with my oldest son at that time. And the doctors would come and they would talk to the parents and they would say, now, before we perform this C-section, we want to let you know that A, B, C, D, on down the list could be wrong with your child. And they looked at my son and said, there are options at 37 weeks. And yes, my grandson was born with some difficulties physically. He had a lot of issues with his breathing and with his lungs and that sort of thing. He was in NICU for, I believe it was about 2.5 weeks. And, every day the doctors would come and say, okay, now here's where we're at. And, and actually to begin with, the first 2 days of my grandson's life, he had a 20% chance of survival because he was not getting any oxygen into his blood. And so he was born in Asheville, North Carolina, and they life flighted him to Winston-Salem. And honestly, I believe that the Lord just touched his little body when he was in that plane coming over to Winston-Salem, because once he got to Winston-Salem, he was just turning every corner and making every mark that they were looking for. And, he does, he is a lively young boy. And so I think we can, just our personal experiences anymore, we can see that there's so much that the medical profession, we look at the medical profession as somewhat a God with a little g, because we think, oh, they're medically trained for these things. What they're saying is true. What I need to listen to this. And, sometimes we forget to kind of go back and assess everything before making decisions. So we have to be very, ourselves, I think we have to be very educated on some things these days.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that story. And it does highlight how vigilant and how, like you said, we have to be able to reflect and assess on things ourselves, because I think it is true. I think we do look up to the medical profession because they are the professional experts in that instance, but yet that does not mean that all of their recommendations should be taken at face value without considering what's best for ourselves. And I think we've learned that more. I have, as I've said, but it's a good reminder. And, that story reminded me of my brother who was born with Down syndrome. And I know there's a perspective out there that, like even the doctor said here, like he might have issues. We do have options, especially with a child with Down syndrome or some other child with a different disability, that perspective that they might not have a full life because of that disability. So therefore, perhaps we should end their suffering before it begins. And that is a perspective that I think begins with a noble thought, but then becomes something that is, at the end of it, is not right. And my perspective anyway. So what do you say to that perspective, I guess?
Well, I want to say this. I think that much of what we deal with as far as the issues of life, whether that be the preborn child or whether that is when people are reaching their natural death, I think that what we have to remember is that we are persons. First and foremost, we are a person who is created in the image of God. We have a right to life as a person created in God's image because he has given us that right. And so we have to remember that these are persons, and that's why it's a lot different when we're dealing with persons than when we're dealing with other, the bee outside the window or something. It's a lot different. We're dealing with persons and we're dealing with their lives. And so we have to look at it from that perspective first and foremost. And once we do that, I believe we can realize then the value that person holds, because how can I assess or give a level to the value that your brother holds in life?
Right.
How can we say that he's suffering more than we are? When you see Down syndrome people, I know you're witness to this. When you see them, they're smiling, they're happy, they're loving, they're compassionate, and they're very passionate too. These are, sometimes I think that what we think is that people don't have all their functionality of maybe their senses or maybe their abilities to walk or to run or to whatever. And so that makes them somehow less than we are. And that is not true, because what happens is, you hear blind people or deaf people, what they say is, no, those other senses that are still working, they become even more acute and they become more sensitive to what's going on. So our bodies, God created them so amazingly and wonderfully in the first place, but our bodies have such a tendency and a wonder to them to be able to rise above some of those incapacities.
Yes. And like you said, they can overcompensate in some areas. I mean, there's so many inspiring stories of people that have some ailment or something that can make life harder for them, yet they've somehow found a way to actually find more beauty out of that in life. And it's almost as though, I believe God uses darkness and difficulty to bring about that light and to show more of himself and allow us to glorify him through what we do with those difficulties. And when you talk about Down syndrome, that's like, in my mind, the epitome of that, because my brother is literally an angel. Like, I literally think I know he's not an angel, but like, I really believe his purpose was to come here and to be a light to the world, because that is exactly what he is. And I couldn't imagine someone more happier, more patient, more loving, more anything. He has something special that none of the rest of us have. And I believe that's true for a lot of people with Down syndrome in their own unique way. I mean, I would say everybody with Down syndrome in their own unique way. And so it's hard, like you said, for us to make an assessment that they are going to have a life that is less than, so we should just end it. But I want to ask, because another perspective or opposition or debate or discussion, which these all make me pause and think as well. So I am not bringing these up to try to just rebuttal them, truly trying to dig into these. But one that's similar is in the cases of like incest or rape or extreme poverty. Again, the assessment could be made that they would suffer or have such a difficulty through that maybe we should just not allow them to have to go through that suffering. What about those types of cases?
Well, again, I believe that we in our history are to the point where we have the testimonies of so many people who have been in those situations, rape or incest or poverty, and their testimonies are, we've had speakers at Georgia Right to Life. One young lady in particular sticks out in my mind right now, and she was raped, and she gave birth to her child. But all along while she was pregnant, people would say, oh, you're going to have to look at your rapist's face every day. Or, how are you going to love this child because you know that this child was conceived in rape? And she's like, this is my child. This is my child. And I think sometimes in our, I'll say in our ideal of what the perfect life is, and I'm saying we in general, we tend to think that, well, that's a less than ideal situation for someone to find themselves in. So, why would we put that person through such torment? My question on the other side of that is, why would we possibly submit that woman to a lifetime of complete sadness or emotional detachment or any psychological or physiological situation by saying you must have an abortion? Because to me, lives are amazing. We're so resilient to many, many things. Children are amazingly resilient to things. And so I think we just have to give people a chance to understand that life is going to be full of difficulties, no matter who we are, no matter how much money we have. I mean, we see all the time in our society, people with lots of money, they have lots of problems that they're dealing with. So it's not this idea, it's just like the poverty. Now, I'm going to say this personally, that I have women who would say, well, Zemmie, what about the woman who is so poor? What about the woman who already has 4 children and she's going to have another child and she is dying because she has sepsis and she knows she's going to die? I mean, there's my story. There is my story. And I will tell you, my life has been impacted by that. But it has been impacted because other wonderful people were willing to stand up and say, hey, we will help you. We will love you. Your mother's not here, but we'll love you. We'll take care of you. And I think that a lot of times, because we rush to make very final decisions, it robs others of the ability to say, hey, I'm here. I'm here to help you through your time of need. I'm here to be there for you.
Yeah, and not to mention allowing God to work through those people. Like he has a plan. Like this child was created with a purpose and a plan. And for us to step in and think that we are helping while essentially playing God in that way, that takes away God's ability to do the work that he has set out to do in this child's life, family's life, whatever it may be.
But I have to say that anytime that I speak for Georgia Right to Life, there is a message that I want everyone to hear, and I want them to hear it very clearly. And that is that if they are post-abortive, if they have participated in taking someone to have an abortion, if they have forced someone to have an abortion sometime in their life, that there is forgiveness that comes from God, that is amazing forgiveness, and that there are people whose life work and their purpose has been to help people like themselves to work through whatever it is that they need to work through as a result of their actions in previous years of their life. And I always want that to be a point to know that, again, everybody's path is unique, everybody's path is different, and God uses lots of different things in our lives to open our eyes and to learn about him and to understand who he is. And I always want that to be a message that is very clearly given from me, particularly when we talk about these issues.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And because God forgives too, we are to be gracious and loving and forgiving as well. And we are fallen as humanity, and we make choices that are less than at times, and we live in a world that is less than, and we have those influences all around us. And so it is very true, and I'm really happy you mentioned that. Before we wrap up, I want to ask one or two more questions. Just again, this next one is really, I think, interesting to think about. And it does, like I said, the other one gave me pause, but this one gives me even more pause. Is what do you do in a situation where either the child or the mother can live but not both? Or when a girl is actually raped at such a young age, which I think happened here not too long ago. It was in the media. It was such a young age that it would be unsafe for her to carry the child to full term. What do you do in those instances?
Well, it's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. I, as part of our ministry here at Georgia Right to Life and our understanding of the Word of God, of course, again, all life is valued and all life should be protected. What we say in the instance of the mother's life being in danger, and that would be any of these scenarios that you set forward, even with the youngest victim, the approach that we would make to that is, okay, a doctor then has two patients. He has a mother and he has a child. Those are his two patients. Now, what we have to think about is what abortion actually is. Abortion is the intentional taking of life. From a medical standpoint, if a physician is serving two patients, a mother and a child, one of those patients dies, even as they're being treated, they die. That is a natural death. That is not an abortion, even if it is the child. And so the doctor is, we would say the doctor just takes care of his patient and medically provides what he can for both the mother and the child. And there's, in our day and time, again, we're so far into the history of, the advancement of things medically and scientifically, that now it's very difficult to, I think, find cases where there is not some type of medical intervention that can be made somewhere. So again, it's just a matter of, I believe, understanding that all lives are to be valued, no matter what or how they are conceived, and whatever those circumstances are, and just to work to protect them as well as can be without intentionally killing someone.
Right. Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. That adds a lot of understanding in, I guess you could say, perspective, is bringing it back to, is this an intentional situation, or is this something we are doing our best at, and having two patients in the room essentially.
Yeah. And I think medically now, we're seeing that women can be treated for things like breast cancer. They can be they can be pregnant, they can be on the chemo, and there's not the effects of that on their preborn child. There's numerous examples that we're seeing now medically where we're so advanced with it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. So last question. What would you say to someone who's considering abortion or isn't sure what to do with an unexpected pregnancy? And are there particular resources you would point them to, or what would you say?
First of all, I would want to know, where they are located, and if it's in Georgia and it's a place where we know of someone that can help them to be able to get resources that they need, either with the pregnancy or financial resources or physical resources, whatever those are. If they need counseling, I would direct them to as many resources as possible that I could. And I will say this, Georgia Right to Life does operate as a resource for people in the community and in the state of Georgia, in that we connect with pregnancy centers, we connect with maternity homes, we connect with adoption and foster care centers. I just recently made a connection with someone who deals with special needs resources. We have an organization that I call if we get a call about someone who may possibly be engaged in human trafficking. And then, of course, the post-abortive counseling. We just have many, many resources around the state that we can point people to. And I will say that when I have those conversations with people on the phone, I do tell them that I will be praying for them in the decision that they make, and that they will consider all of their options aside from abortion, because there are resources out there. And
Yeah.
there's so many people whose hearts are open to God just bringing people into their lives so they can help them. They really just want to help them. I mean, I've seen it in my own life. I've
Yeah.
seen people just reach out to me and say, "We're here to help you." And I'm very grateful for their help.
Right.
Very
Right.
grateful.
I think it's helpful to know that you aren't so alone in this, because I could see how it would be so isolating. And again, when you're in distress and in that vulnerable place of feeling like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And not necessarily feeling like it's something you want to reach out to for help, perhaps. It's nice to know that there are resources like you at Georgia Right to Life and others like those you've connected with, and then some, that they're there. And there's a wide range. There's a wide range.
There is. There is. And the other thing that I always try to remind everyone, including myself, and that is the circumstances that you are in today, they're not going to be the same next week, next year, 10 years from now. You will not be in these same circumstances. So
Right.
there is always tomorrow, so to speak. There's always an option, and there's always hope. And I think that's what, as Christians, I think that's what our story has to be to people, is that there's hope. No matter what your circumstances look like today, there's always something better that you're looking forward to.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. What a beautiful note to end on, Zemmie. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this with all of us through the Love Light Stories podcast. And it was just wonderful to reconnect with you again today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Stephanie. I've really enjoyed being with you and your audience today.
Isn't it incredible how Zemmie's parents had true trust and faith in the Lord? What gets me most is how her father called up her mother at work and told her she wouldn't be going back because they were adopting 5 children overnight. And being newly married and in a 1-bedroom apartment, they weren't necessarily prepared for such a big undertaking, but it was the love in their hearts and faith in God that propelled them to embrace children in sudden need. I also thought it was so sweet how her older siblings went to their adoptive parents after 2 weeks and said they wanted to call them mother and dad. What a powerful and important thing for children to feel such love and security. And lastly, the story Zemmie shared about bringing home Aunt Gwen with MS is another example of that love and faith. Her supposed 6 months to live that turned into 15 years became a true testimony of how someone can thrive when surrounded by love and care of a family. As Zemmie mentioned, seeing Aunt Gwen thrive for so much longer than expected has helped her shape a similar perspective around all of human life. If we're given the chance at life and are surrounded by love and care, we can thrive in otherwise difficult circumstances too. Today's episode is ultimately a full-circle redemptive story. As the executive director of Georgia Right to Life, Zemmie now advocates for human life and adoption herself. I hope you enjoyed this episode full of story and perspective around a quite controversial topic. Which leads me to, do you have a relatable experience or story to share? Do you perhaps have a different perspective about today's topic? Go to the show notes where you can submit your guest idea for the chance to share your own story and discuss your perspective on the show too. We're here to listen, understand, and challenge our perspectives on all issues we face as humanity. And that's what I hope this space allows us to do. And if you'd like to continue expanding your own perspectives and worldviews, I've created a free checklist just for you. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/resources to download my checklist called 12 Ways for Embracing Worldviews That Aren't Your Own. And don't forget, if you or someone you know are experiencing an unwanted pregnancy or related difficult situation, Georgia Right to Life is available to serve as a resource. As mentioned, they can point you to other resources too. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.